welcome to this review of my Apple Aluminium Keyboard, or as is also known in certain parts of the world, the Apple Aluminium Keyboard, which is wrong. Actually, neither are correct, as Apple now refer to it as the Apple Keyboard with numeric keypad. Many just know it as the Apple Aluminium Keyboard, or A1243 though. As the name suggests, there was also a space-saving version without the numeric keypad called the A1242, but that one was discontinued a few years afterwards. There was also a later version, this thing called the Apple Wireless Keyboard, which is even smaller. I have several of them too. And the current standard is the Apple Magic Keyboard, which is even thinner and presumably even more annoying. Let's start with the way it's built, because that includes its most obvious feature. It has a monolithic anodized aluminium top case glued heavily to a glossy plastic white bottom plate, which has the Apple logo embossed on it. It was a complete styling overhaul from the previous several models, which were famously nasty full-height rubber dome keyboards with a clear case that got increasingly revolting the more hairs and food bits visibly accumulated in it over time, something known as board chow. Apple keyboards have always looked very modern for that time, and tended to be based more around striking looks than about functionality in many ways, lacking common features found on other boards, as well as having dubious new features Apple tried to introduce. Similarly, this keyboard is quite striking with its aluminium chassis, which makes it easy to forget that this keyboard is now actually 10 years old. That's right, this was developed at a time when the omnipresent Dell L100 series had only recently come out. The keyboard is extremely thin, even by today's standards, and despite being made out of metal for a significant portion, although it's only aluminium, it weighs just half a kilo. Thinness was definitely one of the major design goals with this board, and everything is geared towards it. In fact, although the metal may make it look tough, the vast majority of boards I found at the recycling center of this model were either bent or broken or had keycaps missing or a combination of the above. And actually the fact that it's made out of metal makes it worse in this regard, because if the case bends, it's much harder to put it back into shape than if it had been if it were made out of plastic. There are two USB ports on the keyboard, one on either side, so you can use it as a pass-through for a mouse, for example, which is pretty nice. And in typical Apple fashion, there are no flip-out feet to adjust the angle of the keyboard, as this would presumably ruin its flat looks. This deliberate anti-feature has been on Apple keyboards since the dawn of time, and it's always annoyed me a little bit because, yes, I know there's ergonomic reasons behind everything, but geez, is it too much to ask to be able to decide for myself? It uses scissor switches, a type of very low-travel rubber domes, which were obviously put in place to keep the keyboard profile as low as possible. Apple have gone for an even more extreme metal dome setup with their newer keyboards called the butterfly switch, which I've heard some pretty bad feedback from. Scissor switches tend to feel quite different from traditional rubber dome setups, not just because of the much shallower travel, but also because they tend to use really tactile cups for the rubber, and because the scissoring mechanism is a bit more complex than a simple keycap pressing down on a rubber dome. So the overall feel is very tactile, not just because of the tactile bump, but also because you more or less inevitably bottom out, and somewhat hard too. And this is my biggest gripe with the Switch. After a while of typing, the switches and the flat keycaps start to hurt my fingers. It's one of the reasons I generally don't like really low travel keyboards. There are a few other disadvantages that this type of switch has though. First of all, being rubber domes, you have to bottom out when typing on them, and if you're used to the more refined feel of mechanical switches, this can easily lead you to not pressing keys down far enough for them to register. Second, the extremely shallow profile and flat tops of the keycaps mean that there's very little to guide your fingers towards the right part of the keys. Do you ever notice how normal, yeah, I think I'm justified in using the word normal in this case, normal keycaps taper towards the top? Yeah, that's precisely because of that. They add more space between the keycaps so that the individual keys are easier to find. But with this system, it's very easy to hit a key on the edges, which doesn't mean it won't go down, because the scissor mechanism acts as a stabilizer for each and every key, so they're really stable and don't bind at all. But the problem lies in how easy it is to hit the wrong or multiple keys at the same time, and it also feels clumsy and counterintuitive, and it makes you slow down every time it happens. So overall, I'm not really a big fan of this type of switch at all, but that said, I do have to say that compared to other scissor switches I've tried, these aren't the worst. They're still fairly tactile, and even though they hurt my fingers after extended use, I've seen switches much worse than this. The keycaps are lasered ABS, and although I've never seen these yellowed, they're very thin, will degrade over time, and they're not easy to replace at all while being easy to lose. As I mentioned, I kept finding these more or less constantly at recycling centers, and they almost invariably missed at least one or two keys. Even the ones colleagues used were sometimes missing keycaps, generally because one of the clips that holds the scissor mechanism just breaks off. So they're not that well made nor particularly sturdy, but not just that, they also get dirty quicker than many other types of keycap I've seen. These often turn up pretty skanky with lots of brown gunk stuck to the keycaps, but thankfully the flat profile of the keycaps makes them extremely easy to clean. And that brings me to the final point about the keycaps, the fact that they're all uniprofile flat. Most keycaps you'll find have been sculpted to make the key tops cylindrical, which helps guide your fingers to the right place and make typing more accurate and comfortable. Even older keyboards use spherical key tops instead, which looks pretty kick-ass to boot. But these things are just pure flat, presumably out of form rather than function, and it really makes you wish you'd have normal keycaps instead. The final nail in the coffin is the layout though. This is an ISO layout one, which shows a massive problem Apple keyboards have had since forever. Apple, again presumably in order to make it smaller and look better, chopped half a unit off the keys on the right. I suppose with an ANSI model this is not the end of the world, but because ISO models have a vertical enter key, its size is instantly reduced to this pathetic sliver here. It's really hard to hit properly as well, which pisses me off immensely, all the more because I'm normally a big fan of ISO layouts. Maybe time for a big-ass enter model? So, what do I think of this keyboard? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it was built purely with the intention of looking good, without regard for how well it actually performs as a keyboard. Now, before you all start shouting at me, I know that there are a lot of you who actually really like these keyboards for some reason, and as I said, compared to other chiclets, it's really not that bad. In fact, it's not that bad of a keyboard at all. Apart from it hurting my fingers, the key feel could have been much worse. But it's mostly the fact that this keyboard could have been a whole lot better if they hadn't sacrificed so many basic features such as flip out feet, keycaps with a nice profile and which don't constantly break off the keyboard, a chassis that can withstand a bit more impact than this actually can, and a layout which isn't ridiculous. At least they put the homing bars in the correct keys this time though. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.